You think you know who the dangers around you are. You believe you recognize when someone is toxic, when an energy is heavy, when behavior crosses the line. But what if I told you that the real danger isn't where you look? It's where you let your guard down. The most destructive people don't shout. They charm you. They don't attack you. They hug you. They don't arrive as villains. They arrive as friends, partners, family members. And little by little, without you noticing, they occupy spaces inside your mind until you cease to be yourself and begin to live under the shadow of what the other person has hidden from themselves. Carl Jung spent his life revealing what no one wanted to see. The unconscious is not just yours. It is also the others, invading yours. When someone does not recognize their own shadow, it needs a host. And if you are empathetic, sensitive, available, you will be the chosen one. It's happened to me. I found myself trying to help someone, only to discover that I wasn't seen as a person, but as a mirror. Everything that person hated about themselves, they threw at me. All the pain they didn't want to feel, I carried. I wasn't a friend. I was a projection, and I only realized it when I was emotionally drained. Jung called this the symbolic field, a space where we cease to be individuals and begin to fulfill unconscious roles. The savior, the traitor, the enemy, the healer. And this can happen to anyone, even you. This is the philosophy of self-protection, not based on distancing, but on awareness. It's not about isolating yourself from the world, but about recognizing the invisible games that drain your life force. In this video, I'll expose the 6 types of dangerous people Jung identified as silent threats to our psychological integrity. And no, they're not always bad. Many don't even know what they're doing. But that's exactly what makes them even more lethal. These profiles don't come with a warning. They disguise themselves. They get close. And before you know it, you're trying to heal pain that isn't even yours, putting out a fire that you didn't start, surviving a relationship that was never mutual. The question is, are you going to keep calling this empathy? Or are you going to learn to protect yourself? Get ready, because once you know these people, you'll never look at anyone, not even yourself, the same way again. And we'll start with the most common, the most charming, and the most deceitful of them all, the unconscious manipulator. Have you ever felt exhausted after a conversation with someone who seemed to be just venting? Have you ever carried guilt that wasn't even yours, but felt so real that you started to wonder if you were really wrong all along? This is the first trap of self-protection, believing that empathy is synonymous with salvation. Jung taught me that not every manipulator is conscious. The most dangerous ones are precisely those who act without knowing it, those who project onto you everything they refuse to see in themselves. They don't attack you with screams. They put you in a distorted psychological field where you unconsciously play the role of savior, traitor, enemy, anything but who you really are. I remember an old friend, sensitive, profound, full of unresolved pain. I started by helping her. Then I tried to understand her. Before I knew it, I was nullifying myself in the name of a bond that drained me. Everything was about her. I was guilty for the silences, for the triggers, even for the wounds she said she didn't understand. It was like being trapped in a mirror that only reflected her pain. Jung called this chronic projection, an inevitable mechanism of the unconscious. But when unrecognized, it becomes poison. The unconscious manipulator doesn't see you. They use you as a screen to project their own shadows. And the worst part, they don't seem dangerous. They are often charismatic, intense, seemingly fragile. You believe you can help them, but in reality, you are being consumed by their unconscious. And the price is high. You lose touch with your own emotional reality. Liberation begins with a question. Is this feeling really mine? Or am I carrying something that doesn't belong to me? That question saved me. It cut the invisible threads that tied me to her emotional game. Today, I recognize the pattern before it takes hold, because protecting yourself is not selfish. It's lucidity. But the unconscious manipulator is only the first of 6. The next is even more subtle. They don't project onto you. They drag you into a world where even your spontaneity becomes a threat. The persona bearer, the master of emotional performance. And that's who we'll talk about next. Not all psychological danger comes from those who attack you. Some come from those who never make mistakes, from those who always smile, always say what they expect from you, always know the right answer. These are the ones who scare me the most, because they don't show their weapons. They show you a polished mirror where you start to hate yourself for not being as perfect as they seem. Carl Jung said that the persona is the social mask we wear to adapt to the world. So far, so good. The problem starts when someone believes they are the mask, when they live only to appear, and demand that you do the same. I have lived with people like this. They seemed flawless. Exemplary behavior, controlled posture, always the right thing to say. But there was something strange, a silent emptiness, as if their soul had been imprisoned behind a continuous theater. And the cruelest part? This charade contaminated me. I began to doubt my spontaneity. I began to edit my words, hide my flaws, measure my affections. Because anything that strayed from the script was treated as a threat. This is the trap of the persona bearer. It doesn't attack you, it numbs you. It slowly leads you to an emotional performance that kills your authenticity. Little by little, you cease to be an individual and become an emotional puppet, trying to maintain an artificial harmony so as not to break the other person's mirror. Jung was blunt. Identification with the persona is one of the greatest obstacles to the process of individuation, because you are no longer relating to a person, but to a mesmerizing social image. And the most dangerous thing, this image requires you to perform, to smile, to hide. If you live with someone like this, you've felt it. The feeling of being on stage all the time, of not being able to make a mistake, that any real emotion can be interpreted as weakness, or worse, as inadequacy. And here's the hard truth. Living with someone who represses everything that is spontaneous not only distances you from the other person, it distances you from yourself. But what happens when that repression builds up? When what has been swallowed by the persona begins to ferment in the basement of the soul? What comes next is even scarier. The bearer of the repressed shadow, the one who lives controlling everything, until the day they explode. And when they explode, it's always you who pays the price. They seem calm, rational, polite, a model of emotional balance. But there is something about their presence that puts me on alert, an invisible tension, as if my every word is being evaluated by an internal judge that I cannot see, but can feel. Over time, I realized this calmness was not peace, it was restraint. Carl Jung said that the shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in himself, but which nevertheless insists on manifesting itself. The owner of the repressed shadow lives exactly like this, as if he were a moral fortress. But this fortress was not built on clarity. It was built on repression. These people have difficulty admitting feelings considered ugly: anger, envy, desire, jealousy, vanity. So they hide them, they bury them, they rationalize them. They convince themselves that they don't feel them. But the unconscious doesn't forget. It accumulates. And when the accumulation is too much, the shadow becomes radioactive. I've seen it happen. People who tolerate everything until they can't tolerate it anymore. And then they explode for trivial reasons. A plate out of place, a misinterpreted phrase, a longer silence. Any detail can trigger an emotional bomb that has been building for years. The problem is that when it explodes, it affects everything around it, especially those closest to it. But what struck me most was not the shouting. It was the heavy silences, the criticism disguised as advice, the sarcasm like a slow poison, the coldness that freezes any attempt at real closeness. Because the owner of the repressed shadow is not explosive all the time. They alternate between control and eruption. And worst of all, they convince themselves that they are always right. Jung said, the stronger the persona, the more violent the repressed shadow. And that's true. People like this cannot tolerate weakness in others because they hate their own vulnerability. They cannot stand spontaneity because they have lost their own. So when you live with them, you begin to doubt your emotional freedom. You start to keep quiet to avoid tension. You start to disappear in the name of stability. But this stability is a prison, and often it hides something even more corrosive: moralism disguised as virtue. The next type not only denies the shadow, they project it onto you, and they turn guilt into an instrument of domination. Not every executioner shouts. Some pray for you. They tell you what is right, what is dignified, what God would expect you to do. But behind this sweet and ethical speech, there is an invisible battlefield where guilt is the most commonly used weapon, and where, without realizing it, you become the prisoner. The moral controller doesn't yell, they embarrass, they don't impose, they suggest. But each suggestion carries a weight disguised as care. You should think twice before you act. What you're feeling is selfish. You'll thank me one day. These phrases seemed like advice until they started to silence me. Carl Jung was relentless in denouncing this archetype. When morality is used as a facade, it becomes a perverse form of repression. The moral controller doesn't want truth. He wants control, not over the world, but over you. And he does this by projecting his own shadow onto your behavior. I lived with someone like that, an exemplary figure, ethical, consistent, fair, until I started to feel diminished for simply being human. Any impulse I had was interpreted as a mistake. Any strong emotion as weakness. I started to mold myself into what was acceptable, until I no longer knew if I was being good or just obedient. Jung said that the greater the internal repression, the stronger the need to project. The moral controller accuses others of what he himself does not admit in himself, and that is the cruelest thing. He firmly believes that he is doing good. He believes he is saving you, when in fact he is erasing your individuality. This figure is common in strict families, religious environments, even in romantic relationships. Love comes conditioned to obedience. Acceptance comes with hidden clauses, and if you dare to question, you become ungrateful, immature, lost. The most destructive thing is not direct judgment. It is internalized judgment, the kind you start to reproduce on your own, the kind that makes you censor yourself before you even speak, the kind that turns desire into guilt, freedom into fear, individuality into shame. And when you start to keep quiet so as not to hurt the other person, but realize that the other person never silences themselves to listen to you, that's when you realize, this is not virtue, this is domination. But the next type is even more unstable, because they don't silence you with rules or guilt. They embrace you, and then destroy you without even realizing it. And in the midst of it all, you start to think that the problem is yours. Get ready. Now we're talking about those dominated by their own complexes. There are people who love you in the morning and blame you at night, who laugh with you now and minutes later act as if you've done something unforgivable, who look at you with affection and then with suspicion. And you, in the midst of it all, start to believe that it's your fault, that something in you needs to be fixed. But the truth is brutal. You're not dealing with a person. You are dealing with their complexes. Carl Jung called complexes autonomous nuclei of the psyche. They are like fragmented personalities, formed by trauma, memories, and repressed emotions. And when they dominate someone, that person reacts to the past, not to you. You become the target of old wounds, ghosts that aren't even yours. I've been there. Moments of affection turned into accusations. A joke turned into an offense. A neutral gesture generated drama. And the next day, regret, tears, promises. This cycle is addictive. You find yourself caught between the version you love and the one that destroys you, waiting for the first to return to justify the pain caused by the second. But it always comes back. And that's why you stay. The insecure person is not only volatile, they are inconsistent. And because they are inconsistent, they force you to live on alert. You measure your words. You avoid certain topics. You walk on eggshells. And little by little, you begin to disappear. But there is something even more silent, a type of destruction that does not scream, does not accuse, does not explode. It just sucks. It is the psychic vampire, the one who feeds on your attention, your empathy, your availability. They lean on you so much that you no longer know where they end and you begin. This type is the hardest to recognize because it looks like affection, but it's dependence. It looks like love, but it's symbiosis. Jung warned about these symbiotic relationships. They don't generate growth. They paralyze. You start by giving support, then time, then silence, until everything in you revolves around the other person. And when you try to back away, the emotional blackmail comes. You've changed. You don't care anymore. You're cold. The psychic vampire doesn't want to grow with you. They want you to carry them. But no one can carry another human being for long without sinking along with them. That's why the philosophy of self-protection isn't selfishness. It's the only way to keep your soul intact in a world where so many try to invade, manipulate, or hide inside you. If you've made it this far, it's because you're ready to see these patterns in others and, perhaps, in yourself. Now I want to know, which of these profiles have you encountered? And even more, Which one do you recognize within yourself? Leave your comment. This could be the first step in breaking the cycle. If this content really touched you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you believe in the power of this journey and want to see more content like this, consider leaving a donation. Any amount makes a difference, because this mission can only continue with your conscious presence.